Quite a bit of feedback on euthanasia tonight. Kimiora Collins described how her whānau takes care of their ill, posting, "My sisters and I nursed another sister dying of cancer. She lived a dignified and painless life right until the end. Her passing was beautiful." Mark Hubbard tweeted, "Maggie Barry has no right to callously deny adults the civilised choice of euthanasia. Overwhelmingly, Kiwis want this option. Our politicians are there to represent our will." Simon Whitlow supports euthanasia, posting, "For most, it is allowing them to exit weeks earlier than otherwise with a modicum of dignity." And Sandra Haynes posted, "Doctors do quietly help the terminally ill." All right, that's an interesting place to come back in, David Seymour. Do doctors already, there are studies which suggest that doctors are hastening death in some, small numbers. Is that a reason you believe why that should be legalised?
It's not a reason why I believe it should be legalised, but it is a fact. University of Auckland Med School research shows that if you ask doctors, last time you had a patient die and what were the circumstances, 4.5% say, well, that was something that I did deliberately to hasten death. So that does happen, and that is the reality. That is the backdrop for people who are near the end of their life and people who are suffering. They actually want to be put in control. They want the law to protect them, and they want a safeguarded procedure they can go through to end their suffering on their terms.
Maggie Barry, what's your response to that? There is some evidence in some medical journal studies of doctors hastening death. Doesn't that suggest there's an issue there?
I don't think that there has been evidence to that effect. I think that doctors give morphine, which is a pain relief, and it is reversible. There is no mechanism in New Zealand for doctors to give a lethal dose of drugs. And we need to be clear about the language we're using in the bill. They talk about medication when it's a lethal drug overdose. It talks about assisted death. Most people in a Curia poll last year didn't know what that was. They thought it was stuff that's completely legal. Assisted suicide and euthanasia is what this law is seeking to change in the Crimes Act. I would put the challenge to David Seymour. How many wrongful deaths does it take for you to live with your conscience?
And I'd put the challenge right back at you, Maggie, because here's the thing. You don't mind wrongful deaths if it's amateur violent suicide.
Of course I do.
You don't mind wrongful deaths, not when it comes to this law, you don't.
I do.
You don't mind wrongful deaths if it's a doctor giving someone a little bit too much morphine.
No, that's
you
not
don't
true.
mind people writhing on plastic sheets, suffering to the bitter end and indignity.
I don't think you representing
all of that
is particularly relevant here, David.
That's the position that you're taking.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry
not.
that you are.
You're misrepresenting
what you
my
object to,
position,
Maggie, is people being able to make the choice for themselves. People should have that right, and they should not have to suffer for your morality.
My compassion and desire for people to die with dignity comes from 25 years working in the palliative care sector as a patron and as somebody who's witnessed both of my parents die through very good palliative care. I ask you again, if you're so confident that your bill is going to deliver safely and always to people, how many deaths would you live with in your conscience? Because for me, one wrongful death under your permissive loose bill is one too many.
Then you cannot support the status quo. You cannot support Martin Hames.
David, don't evade the question.
You cannot support Martin Hames. Oh, well, obviously the answer is none. But you cannot accept
not what you said earlier.
Martin Hames.
No such thing as a perfect bill.
Well, that's true. There is no such thing as a perfect bill, but the current law is not perfect, and no other law is perfect.
And
so let's have a constructive conversation. And I'll make an offer to you tonight, Maggie. Your palliative care bill is actually not a bad bill. It would improve the standards of palliative care across different DHBs. Now, I'm inviting you to have that bill included in the end-of-life choice bill. We could pass it together. You could achieve your goal, but you have to accept that palliative care doesn't help everybody. And some people want a different choice. Well, it was accepted by both sides. It was accepted by both sides as uncontested evidence in the Lucretia Seales court case. So you should accept it. So will you take my offer tonight,
Of course I won't take it. And do you know why?
Because you don't
Because I don't
really
believe
care
that
about
your bill is diametrically opposed to what palliative care is all about. Palliative care seeks to care for people. Your bill seeks to kill people. There is no meeting of the ground here, David.
If we look at the evidence from overseas,
palliative care needs to be. You were saying that I was interrupting you, so
Maggie finish.
I'd like to return what I'm saying. So as we have a series of situations in New Zealand where there is not always equitable access to palliative care. That's why I put the bill together after extensive consultation with hospice and palliative people in New Zealand and internationally. That's what is required before the nuclear button is pushed to bring in euthanasia, which is permissive, which criteria will change because it's happened everywhere else in the world. The bill about enshrining access to palliative care is diametrically opposed to killing patients, which is precisely what David Seymour's bill is proposing.
Okay, let me put that to David. Why can't we have good palliative care if we boost the funding for palliative care and we've got the drugs? Why do we need your bill?
Well, I'm making the offer to Maggie tonight that actually I can incorporate the provisions in her proposal.
I don't want to borrow your bill.
Into my bill.
It's awful.
But the fact is that, as was accepted, I said a moment ago, by both sides as uncontested evidence in the Lucretia Seals case, palliative care is great, I support it, we should have more of it, but it does not work for everybody. Ultimately, if you're one of those people who's suffering and cannot be helped by palliative care in a way you find acceptable, then you should have the choice. It's your life. You should have the right to say, I've had a great life, but I can see what the end's going to be like from here, and if it's all the same to you, it's my life, it's my choice, it's my right to go on my terms and my time.
Okay, let me
put
that back to Maggie. It again comes to that philosophical argument that someone has the right to choose. What is the issue with that if somebody wants that right?
Because their choice is not just confined to them. If people have a suicide, for example, or assisted suicide, the repercussions of that are felt throughout a community, throughout a family, because of the misery and upset. There's a thing at the moment called mature minors that's going on in Canada, where children are able to be euthanized without their parents' knowledge or consent, and the parents can find out afterwards.
But that is not
the protocols. It will be. That's what Canada already has. So that is what is going to be. That is what is going to be ushered in.
That is not being proposed in this bill.
But it will eventuate once the bill.
Well, that's the slippery slope argument. So let me bring David Seymour on that.
With respect, Maggie is showing that she's 100% impermeable to the facts. Around the world where assisted dying has been legalised, there has been no increase in youth suicide.
Of course there is.
That is speculation. There is simply no evidence, if you look at the hard evidence from around the world, that legalising assisted dying increases youth suicide.
So why is it that so many submitters have indicated that their lives, as people who work in the area of suicide prevention, would be made so much harder? How do you tell an 18-year-old that it's okay for someone with disabilities to be assisted to die because their life isn't worth living?
It's not okay.
The Ministry of Health, to David's point though, the Ministry of Health does not see any connection between assisted dying and rates of suicide.
I think it is frankly disgusting that Maggie Barry is prepared to try and hijack an issue such as youth suicide. Exploit the cause of youth suicide in this country to try and advance your own agenda against my bill is disgraceful.
This bill is a disgrace and it will lead to more suicide, and that has been said by thousands and thousands of people who work in the sector who know much more about it than you do as a politician.
Well, they need to read
and they are very, very fearful that this bill will certainly lead to increases in youth suicide and across the board. A spike in elder abuse, for example, where a lot of older people are being 2,000 reported cases a year, but about 70,000 New Zealanders are abused each year. The suicide spike for older men, for example, is very high. They need to be looked after and not coerced, and not to be told that psychological abuse, which does exist, means that, for example, you know, if you don't give me the mortgage on the house, Mum, you're not going to see the children, grandchildren. These are the sort of issues that we fight against.
A final word from you, David Seymour, on why this bill should pass, and do you think it can pass?
I think it can pass, but the biggest obstacle is a constant misinformation campaign of fear, uncertainty and doubt, as we've seen tonight. There are people who suffer. They should not have to suffer because of other people's misinformation and, frankly, trying to impose their morality on others. The evidence from around the world is that these bills work, and the ultimate proof of that is that no country that has had an assisted dying law, in many cases for up to 20 years, has gone back. The opponents need to pick a side. Either this bill is so bad that other countries should be reversing it, or they have to start confronting the real evidence.
David Seymour, thank you very much. Maggie Barry, thank you very much. Right, Jenny is here with What's On Tonight.
Thanks.